All right, I have 7:30, so we're going to get started with the November 1st Arlington County Transportation Commission meeting. First off, I was remiss at our last meeting. Commissioner Warren, his term expired yesterday. I had thought he was going to have one more meeting, and he missed it by a day. So I just want to thank Mr. Warren for his service throughout his term and for coming out to see us tonight, and just generally thank him for all of his input over the course of the last few years.
Also, we have 3 new members of the commission I'd like to welcome. William Capers, Julie Evans, and Naomi Misvin. I'd like to also note that Commissioner Capers is the only one brave enough to come out with such little notice, so welcome. Item 1 is citizen comment, and we have no speakers for citizen comment. Item 2 is the public space master plan. This is an update. We have Irina Lasik here this evening to give you an overview. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Irina Lasik. I'm a planner with the Department of Parks and Recreation, and also with me tonight is Eric Beach, who is a planning supervisor in our department, and Caroline Haynes, who is a co-chair of our Public Spaces Master Plan, or POPS Advisory Committee. So I will go through my relatively brief presentation. So this is some of the items that I would like to discuss with you. We're going to start just a little bit about, we're going to talk a little bit about the planning context and how this document fits into overall comprehensive plan. Then we're going to touch on the timeline, the public input so far, and then we're going to talk about the final POPS draft and next steps in this document. So Public Spaces Master Plan, I know that probably you all know, it's one of 11 elements of the comprehensive plan, and it's the document that basically is our a policy for how we manage and develop public spaces. There are 3 sub-elements of this plan: Urban Forest Master Plan, Public Art Master Plan, and Natural Resources Master Plan. And these 3 documents are not going to be updated as part of this process, but they're going to have their own update processes. As you probably know, Public Art Master Plan is currently in the process of being updated, and Urban Forest Master Plan and Natural Resources Management Plan will be updated after the PSMP update is completed.
Actually, your presentation is not displaying, so we're going to have to let's take 1 minute.
Yeah, we have the presentation on our screens now. It's a good sign.
Okay, thank you. So after actually over 3 years of our collaboration with our POPS Advisory Committee and various opportunities for community to engage in this process, we just released the final draft. The draft was released last week on October 24th. And we will be receiving public feedback online until December 9th. I'm going to talk a little bit more about other engagement opportunities in a few moments. These are all the different types of public engagement tools that we use throughout this process. These are just some of them, not all of them, but we wanted to list you just to show you the various techniques and tools that we used in order to reach out to the broad community as part of this process. So we had our POPS Advisory Committee, which consists of representatives from different commissions and 2 staff, DPR staff, and also community members. And we also had stakeholder interviews, focus group interviews, pop-up events where we went to various farmers markets and solicited feedback from the community. We also held a charrette almost 2 years ago, where we invited local design and planning professionals to volunteer their time and talk to us about the possibilities of the vision for the public space system in the future. Our preliminary draft was released last year, in July of last year. We received over 1,100 comments. We hosted several meetings to talk about the draft. And based on all of these discussions and comments, we decided that we need to have additional conversations with the community and to address very specific topics that were kind of themes in all of these comments that we have received. And those topics are listed on the slide: land acquisition, athletic fields, natural resources and trees, and casual use spaces. In February of this year, we went to the county board and we wanted them to to verify our approach to some of these issues. And we had a discussion with them. So this was a lengthy workshop where almost 2 hours, and the presentation and video is available on the county's website. As I said, the final POBS draft has been just released. And I know you probably can't read all these little fonts, but I'm going to kind of highlight the main sections of this document. So when you read this document, maybe some of you already read it, but it's basically, most of the recommendations are covered under 6 strategic directions. So the strategic direction number 1 is public spaces and covers a very, very broad topics, as you can see listed. Some of them are listed here. It talks from land acquisition to improving access to our waterfronts, to providing better universal access, supporting services and amenities, and talks also about pop-up and temporary uses. Trails, this is probably a section that you're going to find most interested, but this is a section that covers not only multi-use trails, but also hiking trails. So we have several recommendations about improving and expanding our network of trails. I'll go into more details about that section in a few moments. Strategic Direction 3 covers natural and historic resources. So this is a section specifically dedicated to those very sensitive resources that we have and how to better protect them and expand them. Strategic Direction 4 is on fiscal sustainability and partnerships. It talks a lot about how can we improve our relationship with Arlington Public Schools, our federal and regional partners, with how to improve relations with our support groups and volunteers. And also there is certain recommendations about the funding and funding both county and non-county funding sources. Strategic Direction 5 is on programs, and this section basically talks about improving offerings and keeping up with the trends that we are seeing in the community and nationwide when it comes to programming. The last strategic direction is on operations and maintenance, and this section covers a lot of things, primarily focused on improving standards and improving our maintenance practices and also sustainability policies. Appendices section is pretty lengthy, but includes important policies starting from land acquisition and level of services, and then going into more specific policies on athletic fields, dog parks and dog runs, and privately owned public space design guidelines. Privately owned public space design guidelines is something that was not included in any form in the preliminary draft, so it's important just to mention that this is kind of a new section in the document that we just released last week. We also included a section on inventories, trying to kind of be as transparent as possible, how many parks we have, where they're located. It's kind of handy, interesting information for community to have, and talks about acreage of these parks as well. The last thing is our action plan, where basically all the recommendations that are identified in strategic directions 1 through 6 are covered in action plan, and action plan identifies potential funding sources, responsible parties, potential partners, time frames, and some very broadly estimated cost ranges that you're going to see there. As I briefly mentioned, there are some new things that we are developing as part of this document. One of the things that was not included in 2005 PSMP, and we heard a lot of feedback both from our advisory committee and community, that we should have some consensus about certain terminology that we are using in many of these planning documents that we have and that cover public spaces. So what we developed this time is a section on definitions. So it's not a very lengthy section, so we try to really focus on the terms that needed to be defined as part of this document, because there are other definitions that we didn't want to conflict with in other comprehensive plan elements and other planning documents. Did I miss one? No. The other thing that we included is level of services analysis. Our level of service analysis is based on populations and also based on access. So population-based analysis is basically trying to determine, based on the population projections and the amenities that we have and at the recommended standard that we develop in this draft, how many amenities will we need in the future meaning by 2035. So that's where the period where we kind of stop in the future. Access maps on the other side are based on 4 different modes of transit: walking, biking, transit, or transportation, public transit, and driving. And our consultants did this very complex GIS analysis where they overlaid these 4 modes of transit and also incorporated population projection data as part of their analysis. So we identified certain areas, like we are calling them focus areas, and you're going to see in the document several of these maps that have these circles on them. Basically, circles are just some areas that we have to kind of pay special focus on, and just to see what's really missing in this area. It doesn't necessarily mean that these are the exact areas where we would, in this example, have a new dog park, but we may want to think about, okay, what are the barriers? Maybe there is not enough sidewalk in that area, maybe there is no bicycle connection, there might be too many people projected to grow in that area, so one dog park that is in that area will be serving a lot more population. In order to clarify our analysis, we developed 2 case studies in this document. This really pertains mostly to population-based standards. And 2 case studies are on community gardens and diamond fields. Also important to mention that we know that this is the first time that we are developing level of service analysis for our public space system. So that is why we have an important recommendation in the document where we say that we should be conducting a public needs assessment, including this type of analysis every 5 years. Because in order to keep track of all the changes that are happening in our community and all the new trends that are emerging in the public space system. Another important thing that we developed as part of this document are the criteria for synthetic conversion and for lighting, and when and where we would add lighting or convert our fields to synthetic turf. You're going to see all of our fields, you're going to see criteria, methodology explained, and also a list of all of our fields that we have, both county and APS, and they're tested against the criteria that we have developed. So you're going to see how I think they're ranked by the total numbers. So the field that got the highest number will be listed first. This is really helping us better understand what are some priorities in the future. As I mentioned, this is also a very important document. We would really appreciate the feedback on this because nobody had a chance to review it so far. So this was really important both from the community perspective and our advisory committee to develop some broad guidance for the privately developed public spaces. So those are the spaces that have some sort of public access. Another important thing that we developed in this document, the 2005 PSMP already included standards for dog parks. We didn't change them a lot. We maybe slightly revised a few recommendations. However, the new thing in this document are standards for dog runs. Those are those smaller areas for dog exercise areas, basically, that are primarily meant for more urban density, higher density corridors, where there is not a lot of opportunities to develop larger dog parks. Also, an important thing that, and this was something that was supported by our community, are this idea of expanding the Arlington loop and trying to create 2 additional loops, and you're going to see them here. This is kind of like, we are calling them outer loop and inner loop. These are kind of longer loop if for some experienced cyclists or walkers who want to really take a challenge of even expanding the Arlington Loop. And this is some opportunity to kind of go east-west and just seek some opportunities for shorter rides or shorter connections to other areas of the county. Another thing that we also are addressing in this document is the casual use space. This is a term that was kind of coined as part of this process. What we heard a lot of feedback from the community. They wanted to make sure that we are balancing uses in our public space system in a sense that some spaces and some of our parks might be perceived as over-programmed. There are a lot of uses that are specifically designated for one use. So this was the idea of leaving some of or designing intentionally some of these spaces in our parks that are designed for a casual, impromptu use or connection with nature. Another important thing that we developed, and it's now in the, one of our appendices, is the land acquisition. We developed methodology for land acquisition and criteria. The other thing that was included that has not been included before in our previous plan is the list of potential acquisition sites. So we try to map them and provide kind of, in order to be as transparent as possible and also predictable and to some extent, we are mapping those potential priority acquisitions. And you're going to see there is also methodology that we developed and criteria as part of this document as well. I'm going to go very quickly through these recommendations. I'm not going to read all of them, but just wanted to show you kind of the breadth of the recommendations that we are developing. And some of our recommendations are very policy-driven. So, for example, TDR, exploring revisions of TDR. We also have a recommendation that I did not include here to explore revising our zoning regulations to and also there are some that are more specific, such as considering structured parking and rooftop walls in order to expand our public space system or with some kind of creative ways, and not necessarily just adding and using more land. There are also several recommendations that I thought you would be interested in. Multimodal access, we identify that as an important thing as part of the public space system in making sure that our parks are accessible with different modes of transit. Also improving our street network and public space realm, considering our streets as part of our overall public space system. That's something that we heard a lot from our community, and we included some recommendations in our document. Strategic direction 2, as I mentioned, focuses a lot on trails. So there are multiple recommendations there. I just wanted to show you a few examples, but some of them are really related to the expansions of the network of multi-use trails. Some are more focused on ensuring that trails function for a range of users. How can we all kind of work together? Because our trails are multi-use trails, and they're meant for both bicycle use and pedestrian and everybody else. So just kind of ensuring that they can work for everyone. As I mentioned also, there are hiking trails, so we also try to address them. This has been one of the highest ranked needs in our statistically valid survey that we have conducted as part of this document. So we wanted to provide a few recommendations on hiking trails. We consistently heard throughout the process that signage needs to be addressed. Signage needs to be better, it needs to be improved, both for cyclists, but in general, signage in our public spaces. So we developed several recommendations regarding that. Strategic direction 3, as I mentioned, focuses really on natural resources and trees. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there are various recommendations that are kind of trying to improve and expand our natural resources. Fiscal sustainability, I also mentioned this, that it really focuses on kind of regional partnerships or APS partnership, how to expand that and kind of work together and collaborate and develop a better public spaces and use our spaces more efficiently in general. I mentioned also programs. Some recommendations we are developing as part of this section are kind of having these drop-in opportunities for our community, because we heard a lot from our community members that they don't want to have scheduled uses. They really want to have opportunities to kind of use our programs and parks on a drop-in basis when they decide to do that. Also to make sure that our programming works for diverse groups of users and kind of to offer programming for diverse age groups and all that. And also, I just want to show you a few examples from the Strategic Direction 6 that talks about operations and maintenance. And finally, our next steps in this document. So online feedback is open until December 9th. We are also going to have 2 additional opportunities for public engagement, which are open door events, similar to what county board members have on open door Mondays. One is being held tomorrow during the day here at Courthouse, and the other one is on November 15th, which is an evening meeting from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. And we're really hoping that if community members or anybody else has any questions about this document, they're going to come and talk to us and ask any questions. We are going to continue our review and kind of conversations with our commissions. So we are continuing this until I think our last one is with the Long Range Planning Committee on December 12th. And after that, we are hoping to be ready for the request to advertise and PC, Public Planning Commission action and County Board action early next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation, which is not actually comprehensive because I've read that document and it's really long and there's a lot of information in there. Do any commissioners have questions or comments at this time? Commissioner Clement.
Yes, I just today received an email from a group known as the Friends of Arroyo Highlands Parks, and the summary of their document says, commenting on the POPs plan, says that it will guide and be used as a benchmark for all decisions about county-owned facilities, including community parks, blah, blah, blah. Despite an enormous effort and citizen input, the flawed foundation on which the recommendations are based undermines the county's ability to address the many competing public needs and priorities. Underlying all the recommendations is something called level of service goals, which are buried deep in the POPs appendix. Essentially, LOS means we need X facilities for Y people. However, these LOS goals were created without examining the existing or projected supply and demand, that is, the actual needs and utilization of the various facilities in Arlington. LOS numbers are simply plucked from comparisons with other cities. In the end, this flawed approach benefits nobody, including sports players who find it difficult to get field time. So, and then they go on to elaborate on their concerns. Have you seen this document, and do you care to respond?
So I've received a copy of that email late today, so I haven't really focused on responding it, but we're probably gonna spend some time reviewing it then.
Hello, good evening. We are aware of the Friends of Aurora Highlands Pike Park, I believe it's the group's name. Their level of service is something that we have talked about many times with the development of Public Spaces Master Plan, prior to that, the Open Space Master Plan in 2005, and in 1994, which was the Open Space Master Plan at that point. This is something that, as we were going through, we've determined that it's a helpful tool in kind of setting out the direction for how you manage your assets for a park system, both how many and where they go. There are different ways you can approach that. This group does have a different opinion on the methodology to be used. We have used a population-based methodology, which is a fairly common methodology from other major cities and locations around the country. And there's just a different way of going about it. We used one that was relatively simple, that had a minimal assumptions built into it, as opposed to more complex, where you have to bring lots of different assumptions and agree upon those in order to build your level of service. And so we've gone the direction of the population-based level of service. We are aware of their concerns, and we have been working through some of those questions and looking at it. Was there a second question in there?
No.
No. Okay. So yes, we are aware of it. This was part of our conversation that we had the board at the work session earlier in 2017, and the board was comfortable with the direction, and so we have pursued that continuous direction.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Haynes. I'm co-chair of the advisory group on this. I would just also say the claim that it's buried, we've spent a lot of time on this and it's been really public. So it's not at all buried. And this is a big deal, I think, for us to do this in Arlington because we've not done it before. Most other communities do have some kind of level of service. We've not done this. So we think it's a really big step forward. As Eric said, there are different ways of doing it, but this is the more typical way of doing it. The others are extremely staff intensive as far as trying to measure usage for various facilities. And the other thing, as we talked about in the advisory group, is that you can't just sort of pick and choose. You would have to do it for all of the facilities. And it's some are much easier than others because of the kind of data that we might have. And so, you know, down the road, yes, you use as many pieces of information as you can, but this seemed to make the most sense for the first time out for Arlington to do this kind of level of service.
Thank you. Any other commission questions or comments? I have a couple trail comments, which I think shocks no one at all. One is I love to see the outer loop trail in there, but one thing I think is missing from this document is an illustration or something that gives people a sense of what could this outer loop trail potentially look like. You know, I think it's pretty obvious based on where it goes that it's not going to look like the Custis. You know, it's not all in grassy area, it's not in a stream bed, it's not in a park. So I think it would be really helpful to set expectations among the public if there was some sort of illustration or sense of what did those pieces look like. You know, is that a protected bike lane and an especially tree covered sidewalk next to it, or you know, what does that end up looking like as far as user experience is concerned? And then my only other comment would be that the trail standards in here are very light. I think mostly it sets out a minimum width for a couple different classifications of trail, and that's about it. Where if you compare it to, for instance, the standards for a dog run, there's a lot more meat there. And as a community that has had public disagreements over trail design multiple times in the past, I feel like it would be a shame to let this very public, very engaged process to go by without setting down a few more standards about what our minimums are for a trail as far as user experience. You know, what kind of amenities should it include? You know, things like sight lines and you know, curvature, like how windy is acceptable to avoid trees, tree loss, and that sort of thing. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a very useful.
So I have a question as well.
Can I?
Len was going to respond.
Because we know that the master plan for the bike element is ongoing, and so I think we were very sensitive in this to try to make sure that we weren't stepping on any toes in that, but you know, given that this is a high priority and it was in the survey, wanted to make sure we got that in without veering into the bike element. So.
All right.
I would just add that now that they're coming closer to having a finalized or a draft final, we are still coordinating terminology. We've just recently submitted comments to the staff on the bicycle transportation master plan, and we're just making sure we're trying to line those up a little bit better now because we were out ahead of them, and so as Caroline said, we wanted to make sure we weren't stepping past our purview with this document.
That's great, yeah. And I think, honestly, in the bike element, we should be stealing your wayfinding policies wholesale because they're great. Commissioner Calkins.
My question was pretty much exactly how and to what extent does this integrate with the bike master plan? And then do they have the same recommendations? Because I know it's very challenging sometimes when you have a trails master plan and a bike master plan that have differing recommendations. And then secondarily, to the extent of, are these envisioned as recreational trails or as transportation facilities?
So to answer your question about the coordination, so we are, as Eric mentioned, coordinating very closely with our transportation folks on the bike element update. They are, I think their document, what I read, at least the draft that I read so far, is focused on comprehensively on the network of bike network, basically. That includes trails. Trails are one of the elements of their bike network. Our document is really focused only on multi-use trails that could be used both for recreation and commuting. So we don't have any separation between them. We do know that there we have trails that are used, that are heavily used by commuters, obviously, but there's still multi-use trails. So we always have to be very careful with that conflict that exists. Most of our multi-use trails go literally inside of our parks. And those are parks that are being used with kids in strollers and dog walkers, and we have to be kind of very careful. That's why we develop maybe more detail than we anticipated at the beginning, but we really want to make sure that we have some of these recommendations that are specifically talking about avoiding the conflict of users on our trails. So, and I don't see a lot of conflicts between this document and bike element documents. We are really trying to be as complementary to each other as we can. Thank you.
Anything else? All right. Thank you. I didn't miss anybody. Thank you very much.
The next item, item 3, is the 4 Mile Run Valley Area Plan. This is an action item. Richard Tucker is here from CPHD to give you an overview.
Good evening. Trying to find a mic that'll stand up. This evening, I'm going to very briefly go over the 4 Mile Run Valley Area Plan. As you may recall, last month we had a fairly substantial discussion about the plan, and I did review it at that time, so I'm going to be very breezy at this point. Conserve your time for other matters this evening. But I do want to review for those who weren't here and others that may be in the room. So just a deep background, the study area, this of course is the first time that staff was asked to coordinate both an area plan or a land use study as well as a park master plan. The park master plan was adopted in September. So at this point, we're looking for adoption of the area plan, which you received a draft of at your last meeting. The study area includes primarily these industrial properties that are south of 4 Mile Run Drive and east of Shirlington Road. We've had a fairly substantial engagement process that has taken over 2 years to get to this point. So again, I think we've heard from everyone. I think we had some good comments from Transportation Commission specifically over the last several months. Again, this area is designated for industrial uses, the magenta color primarily. The zoning matches that, and one of the major issues early in our discussion with the community was keeping the industrial feel for this area, so that comes through in the plan. These ideas including, in addition to keeping the industrial feel in those uses, providing better connectivity through the area, access to the stream itself, et cetera. So these ideas are consistent within our plan. Again, the concept which I reviewed previously with you was adopted as part of the policy framework in May. The light blue color indicates keeping the existing uses. The purple color in subarea B indicates keeping those existing uses as well as encouraging the arts. And there are some small areas where we could have mixed use opportunities consistent with the NOC plan. So more specific to areas of transportation, I think some of these next slides are, I think, some big ideas that I think will enhance the area in terms of creating more focus and more opportunity for access to the stream. In this case, with a system of overlooks and points of access to the stream itself. within Alley Free Park, a specific location to get down to the stream. And then this idea of creating pedestrian access or enforcing or reinforcing pedestrian access to the western end of the trail of the dog park from Walter Reed Drive. Currently, there's a trail there, but there's no public access across privately owned property. And so that's something staff is actively working towards achieving currently. You all are aware of the concept for reconfiguring 4 Mile Run Drive. I think we've had some healthy conversation about that. This again is the how the street might look adjacent to Jenny Dean Park. The angled parking would be in place to provide parking for the park uses. It would be angled parking, back-end parking, and this would be implemented in time for the opening of the park. And looking more broadly at the streetscape, our goal is to create more people space on the south side of the road. What we see there is sidewalk is actually privately owned land. The private property extends into the street. Just by using paint, we can change that, create more people space, and work towards, if this is functional and safe, we can work towards final implementation and moving curbs and so forth. So that is something that we can do in phases as funding permits. This idea of gateways and wayfinding is certainly something that we're going to coordinate with the Park Master Plan as the Jenny Dean Park process rolls forward over the next year as they come up with their final design. One of the elements is wayfinding. And so as that is discussed, we will be looking at how we're going to coordinate for the broader area and have that be consistent with the wayfinding that we find in the park. So that design process will sort of emanate from their process. Just some notes about our implementation steps. This graphic was changed on the upper right. We had shown an arrow where we would have early implementation of parking changes. Those parking changes are being discussed currently. There was a meeting last week with business owners and park users, dog park users. There will be a meeting next Monday with the Knock neighborhood to outline what changes could happen in terms of parking regulations near Jenny Dean Park and along 4 Mile Run Drive. So that's going to be discussed, hopefully with good input that can be implemented in the next several weeks. So there will be a change on an interim basis between now and the time that the Jenny Dean Park construction starts at the end of 2019. So that'll be in place and hopefully help with parking turnover and providing parking opportunities for more people in the area. Another point to stop on is this as the next step is talking about an arts and industry district and what the boundaries of that and what the character of this would be, working with the Arts Commission and the EDC, and then having a broader community conversation about that. And as part of that, looking at the 3 properties that the county currently owns that has the sort of green shading, and then another parcel that the county has an option to purchase adjacent to the 3700 building on 4 Mile Run Drive, and adding that to the conversation as well. So we've updated the document to account for the new parcel that the county may consider acquiring. As we look at land use and zoning changes, we've also updated the concept plan to show the 2 parcels that the county has purchased for bus operations. We had noted one where the buses were being parked temporarily, but now that the properties have been acquired, we've updated the map as well. So we've had some follow-on community process, including attending the last Transportation Commission meeting. The board has advertised the plan, and we're prepared in the next 2 weeks to have the plan adopted and moving right into implementation. So I certainly will entertain any questions or comments you have at this time.
Thank you. It's been a long time coming. Are there commissioner questions or comments at this time? Commissioner Calkins.
I know we as a commission had a couple of recommendations and questions for modification to the draft plan before it's adopted. Were those able to be integrated into the document?
There were a number of comments that we received both at the TC and the Planning Commission. There were some editorial comments that we've captured. There are some other updates that we're still working to make in the document as well.
Anybody else? All right. Then I move that the Transportation Commission recommend that the County Board adopt the draft 4 Mile Run Valley area plan. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? All right, that's unanimous.
All right, I'll be back next month. No.
No, no more.
The next item is item number 4. This is the Best Western Motel site. This is an info item, and the applicant will give you a brief presentation.
Commission will take a quick 5-minute break while the applicant gets set up.
Are you going to present first? What? Or do you have a presentation? Or?
No, it's you.
Oh, just you. Us? Nice. Yep. All right. Wanted to make sure I didn't jump you.
Nope.
All right, Mr. Best, let's get started.
Okay, item 4 is the Best Western Motel site plan. I'll turn it over to the applicant for a presentation.
Good evening, everyone. Nicholas Cummings with the law firm of Walsh Colucci here on behalf of the applicant. I'm going to briefly go over just a quick introduction of what this project is before I turn it over to the real experts here, Wells & Associates. This project is a major site plan amendment to Site Plan 233, or what is best known as the Best Western Iwo Jima Hotel. It's now a red line. It's no longer a Best Western. The property is located at 1501 Arlington Boulevard, close to Route 50 in Roslyn. Nearby buildings are the Belvedere and the Park Roslyn. Belvedere is a two-building condo building. The existing structures on the site are quite old. The hotel was constructed in 1957, and the apartment building was constructed in 1954. There was no site plan back in the 50s. Everything was done pursuant to the zoning ordinance as it then existed. Site Plan 233, which we are amending, was approved in 1985. That was in conjunction with an expansion of the hotel. Our application adds additional site area to the project, bringing it to about 1.9 acres because we are adding the existing Ellis Arms Apartments. That is a 14-unit apartment building also located on the site, a little closer to Route 50, but right next to the hotel. The property is zoned RA 4.8, which covers the apartment building, and RAH, which covers the hotel. We are not rezoning a property. There is no GLUP change here. The proposal is to demolish both existing buildings and redevelop with a new hotel and a new apartment building. The apartment will be about 64,000 square feet and 64 units. The hotel will be 160 rooms in 12 stories, and the apartment building is about 10 stories. Both comply with the height limits for their respective zoning districts. We have been through so far 2 SPRC meetings and held a walking tour of the site. The walking tour, I think, was particularly helpful because it helps highlights the challenges with the topography on this site. This property is up against a significant retaining wall that sort of frames 16th Street. Next to us, we have Park Roslyn, which is built into the hillside. The Belvedere also makes use of that topography as well. Prior to SPRC, we also met with the RAFON board, the Unit Owners Association of the Belvedere, and the Roslyn bid. So we've done some community engagement before we got into the SPRC process and before we came to you here today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Wells for the real meat of this presentation.
Hello, good evening. I'm Mike Pinkowski with Wells & Associates. I'll give you an overview of the transportation elements of this application. So the site is located on the north side of Arlington Boulevard and Fairfax Drive. It's just outside a quarter mile from the Roslyn Metro and just outside a half mile of the Courthouse Metro. The proposed access for the site will be divided into 2 separate access points. On the westernmost side of the site will be the residential access, as you can see on the left side of the page, while the hotel entrance will be on the easternmost extent of the property, or to page right. A couple of other things highlighted on the plan here are the loading for each of the uses, the loading for the residential on the left, one loading berth with trash, and then 2 loading berths for the hotel with the trash bay as well. The bike room will be located on the first floor, the secure bike room. There'll be 42 bike parking spaces in that room. That meets the code requirement. And then currently there's 2 horseshoe racks proposed, or 2 locations for the class 3 bicycle racks as shown on the plan. For a total of 10 bicycle parking spaces. 2 things that are kind of on the very bottom of the page that get cut off, apologize for that, is in front of the residential lobby, right next to the little bike icon, there's going to be 2 short-term parking spaces. And then you could see right next to the tree there, we're relocating the existing crosswalk that today is on the eastern side of the Best Western driveway. We're moving it to the west, and it is going to be proximate and essentially right next to the pedestrian bridge. So here we just summarizing the local bus routes. Again, in the upper right is the Roslyn Metro. To the left is the Courthouse Metro. Right in front of the site, the WMATA 4A lot line runs, excuse me. The bus icons are generally where all the bus stops in the area are, and also noted on this plan is the car share facilities. This is the Arlington County bike map. The blue indicates on-street bike routes, while the black indicates on-street bike lanes. I will note that, as many of you are probably aware, that in between Fairfax Drive and Arlington Boulevard is also an asphalt trail that runs east to west into Roslyn. So we performed a multimodal traffic study. What we're looking at here is the 6 intersections we were asked to analyze. To the east, we analyzed the 2 signalized intersections of Fort Myer Drive and Lynn along Fairfax. And then to the east, we look at the unsignalized stop control intersections of Queen and Pierce Street. So a quick summary of the multimodal traffic study. We did scope the project and the study with DES staff. It's still currently under review, so we'll be working with staff to address any comments that come out of their review. Based on the existing conditions, the 2 signals currently operate at acceptable levels of service. Our study does note that the off-ramp at Pierce Street does have some queuing delays, or excuse me, at Queen. That generally, if they back up along the decel lane, they do not extend back into Arlington Boulevard, but we did note in our traffic study that there is some peak hour queuing for that approach. It currently operates under stop control to allow the traffic east-west on Fairfax to continue. The max pedestrian observations were observed at Fort Myer, Fairfax Drive, and we note about 14 AM bicycle trips going up and down Fairfax Drive, while 23 during the PM peak hour. From a development perspective, we're going to proposing 160 key hotel, 64 dwelling units. It's a slight increase over the existing condition out there. It equates to approximately a net of 26 additional AM trips and 30 PM trips. We looked at a build-out year of 2019. We included a growth rate of 5.5%, as well as we looked at 3 pipeline developments in the vicinity. With the application and the modest additional trips, the intersections will continue to generally operate as they do today or in the future without us. The application will include streetscape improvements along the site frontage. We'll show you a couple rendered streetscapes. It'll have an 8-foot clear sidewalk. I mentioned the relocated crosswalk on Fairfax Drive, and we'll be implementing the TDM plan that would include the parking management plan. So here's, we have 3 snippets of the streetscape along the site frontage, starting from the west going east. So this is right in front of the residential entry. So where the cross section was actually taken was right at the front door, and there'll be a couple stairs located there. In this area, there'll be about a 6.5-foot clear sidewalk, and Grady's kind of has the cursor over on page left there. There is a ADA ramp that provides access into the front door as well. This shot is in front of the hotel. Again, the 8-foot clear sidewalk with the parking lane, and the building zone throughout the front of the property does vary depending on where you take the cross section. This is towards the eastern end of the site where the retail, or the retail will be located. Again, 8-foot clear sidewalk. In this area, there'll be a planting strip, and then again the building zone. So summary of the parking and loading, I alluded to the loading a little bit prior. The application is seeking modification of the parking ratios for a 0.7 for the hotel and a 1.0 for the residential. The plan currently is providing 192 parking spaces. Based on the code requirement, they would need 232. Parking will be meeting the code requirement, a total of 42 Class 1 and we're actually exceeding the 6 required Class 3. As I mentioned earlier, 1 loading space for residential, 2 for hotel. This is pretty much the standard TDM commitment, which we will be committing to, just highlighting the parking management plan, the fare mediums for new residents and new employees of the buildings, and then just the ongoing performance and monitoring. So we're happy to answer any questions that you guys have. Thank you.
Thank you. Does staff have a presentation as well? No. All right. Are there any public comment on this, Mr. Best? All right. To the commission. Commissioner Clement.
Yeah, this is a very basic question. So this is not a site plan request. This is just regular zoning? This falls within the existing zoning ordinance?
This is a 4.1 special exception site plan.
Oh, it is.
What I was trying to clarify the outside of my presentation was just that we're not requesting rezoning. That it's what we are doing is what is permitted by special exception within the current zoning districts. If that makes sense.
Okay. And what triggers the special exception? What triggered the request for a site plan approval?
Like in many, is this on? No, it's off. Yeah, there we go. Much better. Okay. So to answer your question, like in many zoning districts in Arlington, there's a certain amount of development that you can do by right. Often that's very limited. And then there's a certain amount of development you can do by special exception site plan. And so here we are going by special exception site plan because it permits you to build the buildings that we are proposing today. I do not know off the top of my head what the by right development criteria are for RAH and RA 4.8, but they are obviously much more restricted than what is permitted by special exception.
Other commissioner. Commissioner Lantalmy.
The parking structure, I assume that's being shared by the hotel and the apartment building? And if so, will the apartment building have reserve spots in it, or is it sort of first come, first serve? How are you going to manage those spaces?
The actual details of that have not been finalized yet. I would imagine that there would be some kind of arrangement where the residents would have reserved parking, whether it be at the top of the garage so that you don't have hotel guests driving through the residential area, but those details have not been finalized yet.
Part of the reason I ask is I don't want us to have a situation where we're overparked, that it could be flexible enough that if it's not being used by the apartment building, the hotel would be able to use it, and vice versa.
Based on the current design, there's going to be no physical gates or anything in the garage. So at a minimum right now, it would be marked spaces, residential or hotel.
Okay.
Other commission questions or comments? Commissioner Hester.
Just a quick comment. As someone who lives in Fort Myer, I'm very happy to see some redevelopment of that area. I think it desperately needed it.
Anyone else? I'm just going to reiterate a little bit what I said at Site Plan Review Committee. The POPS plan that we just saw a little while ago and the Bicycle Master Plan are both talking about Arlington Boulevard Trail. I really would love to see some progress towards that as part of this redevelopment, given the streetscape that's currently there. I think it's going to require a little bit of thought by staff ahead of which side of Fairfax Drive should a trail be on once we get down to this end of the area. Personally, I think probably we're going to have to cross from the south side of Fairfax to the north side of Fairfax at some point because, gosh, that pedestrian bridge is awfully in the way in that median and that sort of thing. But there certainly seems to be some road width there. The existing section of Fairfax Drive appears to have 13 to 15 foot traffic lanes right now. So potentially this 8-foot sidewalk becoming a 12-foot shared use trail instead in front of the building would certainly be movement in the right direction, though I leave that sort of design to staff and the applicant. Anything Anything else? All right. Thank you for the info, and we'll see you back in a bit.
And our next item is item number 5, the Reed School redevelopment. This is an action item. I'll turn it over for the applicant for a presentation. And we currently have one speaker for this.
Go from here. Is that okay? You had the presentation. Okay, let me put mine. Oh.
And actually, we will start off with a staff presentation. That caught me off guard as well.
Okay. If you don't mind clicking for me. Actually, thank you. See? Good evening, everybody. Robert Gibson from the Arlington County DES Development Services. I picked up Reed School from Jane Kim. She recently had her little daughter, so happy to fill in for her for this project. This is a use permit amendment for the Reed School and Westover Library U3175071. A little history on the Reed School site. Reed School originally opened in 1938 at the site. It was expanded upon until ultimately 1984 when it closed as a neighborhood elementary school. I was actually in second grade at Reed School when it closed, so it's fun to bring it back to life. Then in 2007, between 1984 and 2007, it continued for APS programs, and ultimately in 2007, the county and APS undertook a major renovation of the site and historic preservation of the original Reed School building, Walter Reed building. And at that time, the county moved its Westover Library from the corner of the property to the Washington Boulevard McKinley corner. And so with that project, some background on the sort of site statistics. The GLUP and zoning is S3A public. The site area is about 10.88 acres. And then the existing buildings on the site is 61,000 square feet, including the 16,400 square foot library. There are 72 parking spaces on site to support the two uses. And then in 2012, the county board approved a use permit for the Westover Farmers Market. And now we come to the site today. This is an image of the property. It has frontage on Washington Boulevard, McKinley Road, which turns into 18th Street North, along the southern edge of the site, North Lexington Street on the north and eastern edge. The northern edge is bound by residential houses. There is access to the site through a walkway about mid-block down on 19th Street. And then to the rear of the site has access off of 18th and Madison Street. Next. Just to go through some of the parking information for the site here. When you look at the on-street parking along the frontages of the site, along with the spaces on the site, there are about 127 spaces, 72 of which are on site, 46 in a rear lot, and 26 in a lot that was created along 18th and McKinley. There are 38 approximately on-street parking spaces on Washington Boulevard, 18th, and Lexington. These spaces are unregulated today. And then there are 17 spaces right in front of the school and library, which are currently 2-hour reserve parking. Next. So APS will bring before you today a proposal for 112,919 square feet of combined addition and renovation on the site. And that's with the library, the total GFA for the site is 151 square feet. The proposed school will support 732 students of design capacity. The project proposes 133 spaces on site. To accommodate the increased GFA, the project is proposing a 4-story addition to the site generally within the footprint of the existing building, limiting the impact to the surrounding open space and parcel and amenities. And so with that, the project proposes site access improvements, improvements to entry plazas, playgrounds, fields, and open space. The proposed modifications for the site include parking reduction, building height, setbacks, along with some other minor additional modifications. The school is proposed to open in 2021, if approved. And this gives you a quick rundown of some of the site amenities and layout of the site. The applicant will provide more detail in their presentation. 78 spaces are proposed in an expanded northwest lot to the rear of the site and the rear of the library. Then there are a total of 55 spaces within the 18th Street lot, 8 of which are in a new a new parent pickup and drop-off lane that's being created, and then 47 spaces in the expanded parking lot. The yellow shaded area shows the existing footprint of Westover Library, which is to remain open during construction. One more thing about the project. They're estimating approximately 146 staff at this point in time. The project proposes, is required under the zoning ordinance without a modification, 150 spaces, 117 of which are to support the school and the 173 students of design capacity. And then, 732 students of design capacity. And then there are 33 parking spaces which are required to support the library. The zoning ordinance does permit schools to modify parking requirements, but it does not permit libraries to change the parking requirements. So the proposal technically is to provide 100 spaces on site for the school and have 33 remaining spaces to support the library. The county board is authorized to amend and modify parking under section 14.3.7.c.1, and some of the information is on this next slide. And so with a use permit, the county board can modify parking requirements, and consistent with the MTP, the goals of this are to limit impacts to play fields, open space, and other open space and undeveloped area, with the goal of improving and reducing impervious surface area, minimizing grading, and preserving existing trees or similar objectives. Next. To do this, the project must have a transportation demand management plan to support the proposed reduction, and should show that modification will be mitigated by utilizing available on-street parking, abutting the site, and through the implementation of measures identified below, TDM, off-site parking, and generally reducing parking through shared parking. This project is principally implementing transportation demand management strategies along with the utilization of parking spaces abutting the site to support the proposed reduction of, I think it's 19 spaces. Next. And so throughout the BLPC PFRC process, APS and their consultants working with staff and the community took a pretty rigorous approach to looking at right-sizing the parking for this site. First was to look at the zoning requirements for the site. Then they also looked at what the actual demand for parking would be at the site based on the number of students and other observations and information on the library use and its demand for parking on the site. Then they took into account the transportation demand management implications for parking, and then considered how appropriately utilization of on-street parking adjacent to the site could support a parking reduction. Next. So with this, the project proposes to utilize 78 spaces to the rear of the site. These spaces will be principally used to support the staff of the library and the teachers. This is done to reduce the transportation impacts to the rear of the site in the residential neighborhood, and then focusing all of the visitor and higher turnover parking along the commercial edges and within the parking lot on 18th Street. So what we're proposing to do is modify the parking that is on Washington Boulevard today, changing it to 2-hour parking to promote turnover and support the library and other commercial uses in the area. Convert all the parking along the northern side of 18th and McKinley to 2-hour parking, then expand the lot on the 18th Street lot to support the 55 vehicles. That'll be a mixture of staff parking for APS and a minimum of 26 designated spaces for visitors to the site. In addition, there are 19 spaces approximately along North Lexington Street, along the site frontage, that could support parking for all-day use of the site. Next. And so with, go back, I'm sorry. Back one slide. And so with this, staff recommends and supports the proposed parking modification. There's only one sort of minor issue that staff and APS continue to work out, and it's with this next slide. This relates to an existing pathway that provides access from the northwest lot and the neighborhood to the rear of the site to Washington Boulevard. In the red area, the pathway is highlighted. This is an existing pathway today. It is not completely ADA accessible based on information that APS has measured. So what we're hoping to do is, and has still not been incorporated into the plans, rework some of the site around the parking lot to provide an ADA connection. We believe that this is possible. It may have some cost implications, and we continue to work with APS to get this, and would certainly welcome your feedback on this issue. Next. In addition to the use permit amendment, the project also has a number of vacations associated with it. These vacations, to a large part, are related to cleanup work from where utilities were placed with the renovation previously in 2007. So these are not substantial changes, and they're all within the site. Next. So with that, staff recommends approval of the subject use permit amendment for the renovation and addition project to create a new neighborhood elementary school at the Reed site with design capacity of approximately 732 students, with modifications to parking, height, and other modifications as necessary, subject to the proposed conditions of the staff report and with no further scheduled county board review. And as it relates to the vacations, staff recommends that the TC determine that the proposed vacations of 3,213 square feet of water and sewer easement, 3,354 square feet of 10-inch stormwater and storm sewer easement, along with 812 square feet of 5-inch sanitary sewer easement and 1,272 square feet of 20-inch storm sewer easement are substantially in accord with the adopted master transportation plan or accepted parts thereof. We do have some information on associated conditions. You'll notice that the conditions that are before you today are somewhat different than the conditions previously approved. We've had the opportunity to really learn from the past school projects that have been approved and built, and have worked with APS to identify changes to the condition to streamline some of our processes, reduce costs for APS, and overall continue to protect the community during construction and deliver the types of projects that the community expects. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right there on the bottom.
Take a minute, let me do a backup. If you don't, do you have it?
No, I don't have it.
I have to do a backup.
Okay.
Do we want to take the one speaker, perhaps?
Sure.
The one and only speaker for this evening is William B. Lawson, Jr.
These are the computer skills they're teaching in the Arlington schools these days. Ladies and gentlemen, for the record, I'm Barnes Lawson, Jr. My parents went through the Arlington public school system. I did, and my kids did. And one of the greatest school systems, I think, in the country. I'm here tonight representing the Westover Shopping Center. And in the beginning, we had some concerns about this, especially given the fact there's a parking reduction. And the last thing that my client wanted to do was become a, parking police. We're kind of a unique situation. People park there, they go to the hardware store, then they cross the street and have lunch or something, and then come back, and it would just make it really hard to police. And so we were concerned that, mostly concerned that parents would end up in the parking lot for hours on end and take up our parking. We've had some meetings with the folks in the school system, and our concerns are pretty much addressed. We've talked about the future and being involved in the traffic management plans and the parking plans, and working with the principal and knowing when special events are coming. You all that have kids in the school system, when there's a special event, it just consumes the neighborhood with parking. One of the biggest concerns that we had was we have this angled parking in front. It's kind of weird situation. It's in the county right of way, but it's counted towards our required parking for the post office. And we were really concerned that parents would park there and go into the school for a couple hours or all day even, and we would lose the ability to have that for customers. I met with the county manager and expressed that concern, and so he had the staff look into that, and I'm pleased to say that he's responded to that. We're going to have 2-hour parking be enforced in front of that commercial in that angled parking, which we think is a real lifesaver for our business. Another thing that we've thought about is to add some extra parking in the rear. We found a place where we could add about 10 spaces, but it's an old use permit. We can't do it that way anymore. We've got a request into zoning to see if we can, if there's any way we can do that. The last time I was here, you all asked me to look into a situation, and that is the parking by the employees of the post office. And what they're doing is the employees show up and they park, and then they go get in the post vehicle, which is a reserved space, and then they take off and do their job. I looked into that, and unfortunately, it's a situation where the post office says, here's our lease, sign it or don't sign it. And if you do sign it, then our people get to park wherever they want. And that's really nothing we can do about that. But that was a great suggestion. We did look into it. The only thing that I've seen, we just got this staff report, and the only thing I've seen that I would, request is that in several of these conditions, such as page 33, we have the conditions that, whenever anything goes on, they notify Highland Park, Overly Knolls. We want to be added, as somebody who will receive notices of these kinds of things. And also notice in going through some other information that we have a registered agent that we think is getting our mail and not forwarding it. So I'm going to probably substitute myself as a registered agent. That's all I have. We're comfortable with it now. We're confident and comfortable that working together with the school system, we'll be able to take care of our needs and their needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. All right, looks like the applicant has sorted out presentation.
Sorry about the miscommunication. I'm Jeff Chambers, Director of Design and Construction with Arlington Public Schools, and I have Rob Schiesel with Garov Slade, who did the transportation study, who will be here for any questions that you may have on specifics, but I'll go through the presentation. First, we're going to talk about the process and schedule. Project parameters, essentially, as Rob noted, we're creating a new elementary school, neighborhood elementary school with an attendance zone, and basically we're supporting the APS strategic goals, which is for a healthy, safe, and supported students, which is our charge, is to take care of the students and then the community in general as part of that. Address the capacity by providing at least 725 seats. We are at 733, Aji? Is that where we are currently? 732. And we plan to open school for the start of the 2021 school year in the fall. And if you have followed any of the process, and I know at least one of you was on the process with the BLPC PFRC process, and we initially had a budget of $49 million. And that was because we had intended to reuse the school. We also realized that there was a stormwater pipe on site, which really tightened up the site. We essentially had to build on one side or the other, so it really challenged us and challenged the committee, but I think we came to a good solution. But it added about $6 million to the budget where we are. But the board has provided the funding. However, they have given us a strong direction to come in as much under that as we are able to do. Essentially, October of 2017, there was a joint county board and school board kickoff for the project, and we worked through the process. And we have currently, in September, have put together the the design development. In October, design development submission has been submitted, and we're in the midst of the use permit proposal, and you can see we're about halfway through the process to September of 2021 when the school opens. As I mentioned, the BLPC PFRC process, the one thing we did differently here versus other projects is we used to meet separately. We were going to have 3 of the meetings to be joint and then go to separate meetings, but we found it was working so well, we decided that it was much more beneficial to continue having joint meetings with separate breakouts of each of the groups so they could have their own conversations as the process proceeded. In addition, we had a public site tour. I think we had 2 tours on a Sunday morning while market was open that we toured the building and the site. And then we had a community forum, and we had another community in January and another community forum in May. So then we got to the schematic design approval. Actually, we did change the dates there. We didn't pick it up in the typo. But actually, it went for information on the 17th, and it was approved August 2nd. Sorry about the typo. Moving into the site design, as Rob had indicated, the existing facility had 76 parking spaces, with the Madison and 18th parking lot had 46 spaces in it, mostly for staff. I think it had been used by others as well. The Westover Library, again, was on the Washington Boulevard, McKinley Road corner, previously being on the North Lexington 18th Street, but that property still remains as county property. The Children's School was a nonprofit daycare serving APS staff, an integration station, special need preschool. Both have been relocated. So I think one thing I did want to note on the parking on 18th and McKinley, you'll notice there were 2 curb cuts onto 18th Street. So that'll be changed as we move into the design process. With the revised layout, what we're looking at doing is having in the 18th Street parking lot in the rear, you can see by color coding, the school use is red, the library use is green in the back there. And again, that would be staff. The intent of that is will be fewer trips in and out because they're basically parking for the day. But also those spaces could be utilized by the restaurants and the businesses in the evenings and off hours, and that would be a place for them to park. In addition, the county is working with the Washington Boulevard, McKinley Road, 18th Street to make that short-term parking, 2-hour parking, with the exception of where the buses are sitting, which would be restricted during the bus drop-off and pickup times. The parking lot on 18th and McKinley Road, you can see, has been enlarged, but the one thing we did do was eliminate the one exit, or it was the exit from the parking that had been there before, so that entry and exit is only through one curb cut to reduce conflicts on the street. And you can see, again, color-coded, we have the school use and the library use color-coded as green and red. The blue is parent pickup and drop-off for the school time. And then when pickup and drop-off isn't happening, those spaces would be available for use as visitors parking, evening event parking, et cetera, so that they would be there being counted. So the on-site parking use, library use is 33 spaces, also as Rob had noted, and school use is 100 spaces for a total of 133 spaces. And by location, the Madison 18th lot has 78 spaces, and the McKinley and 18th lot has 55 spaces for that 133 total. Again, the Madison 18th lot is for staff, and then we have some library patrons we think would be utilizing the 2-hour parking along Washington Boulevard, McKinley Road, and encouraging the turnover. And we're trying to make sure that we have as much parking on the site for the staff uses and the school uses and the library uses for staff, so that we aren't taking up the closer spaces that could be used for the retail businesses as well as for patrons of the library and parents that might be coming to the school. You'll notice on Lexington, you'll see the red line, and that would be intended to be staff parking that would be assigned or would be on the street. So we don't have everybody in the lots, but we do have spaces around the site. Thanks, Aji. And then this takes us into the parking supply. And one thing that we've noted is that on the left-hand map, the blue spaces are what we're referencing in the chart. But as you notice that occupancy does not reach 40% during the day of that parking area. There are some areas that are more heavily parked than others. It's not universal, but there are a significant amount of parking spaces adjacent to the school that are available most of the day. And you can see the hours when things are available, but never goes over 40%. With regard to entrances to the facility, you can notice that the main school entrance is entrance A, and then we have B, which would be a student entrance, essentially for the students dropped off by their parents, walkers, et cetera, can go into the building in that location. And then the C is the after-hours entrance. It also has restroom access. So for Sunday market, for use of the fields and other events, community events, the toilet facilities can be accessible without opening the entire building. Also in the C entrance is also the enclosed bus, or the enclosed bike rack, bike locker space, and locker facilities for the bike riders for the TDM. In the back, it's essentially service entrances and staff only. Again, we're doing that to encourage or to discourage parents from trying to drop off students in the back of the building and trying to manage the site the way we intend it to be managed. And then F is essentially a handicapped accessible staff entrance to the library from the parking area, which is why we've created the sidewalk in the back to get in there. And G is the two library entrances that you currently go in to the library. Proposed pedestrian circulation. Essentially, the circulation doesn't change that drastically on the site. We have the connection from, I believe it's 19th Street down to 18th Street, coming down through the center of the site, which we're maintaining that connection. Essentially, under that is where the storm pipe is that we have to work around or with. So if you notice, most of the site development is to the left of that, and to the right would be the fields and keeping it pretty much open space the way it currently is. And if you notice the walkways, essentially one of the things that APS is always trying to do is have universal accessibility to all of our sites and all of our buildings, and working with, as much as possible, handicap accessibility without ramps and handrails where we can. Other places we just have some steps, and we do make it as accessible as we can. One thing I did want to notice is that connection between 19th and 18th Street currently is about a 4'10" path. We're making it wider to 6 foot wide, so it's a more generous path that comes through the middle of the site. We do have exterior bike racks, which are indicated by the red circles, and then the space that I was talking about in the blue oval is a highlight or a blow-up. You can see the bike storage, the Class 1 bike storage with 16 spaces. That's also the after-hours entrance. And then we have the toilets and shower areas, and the shower areas can be closed off when it's being used as a public restroom after hours, but during the day. And we had something similar to this at Abingdon, which seems to work very well, and we can maintain and control electronically the locks on the doors. The receiving area in the back of the building, essentially we have about 13 deliveries to the building during the day, which includes the postal deliveries. Most of those will be coming to the front. The back would be restricted to smaller delivery trucks and vehicles. An 18-wheeler is not going to deliver there. They would have to be delivered on McKinley at the front of the building. But we have different sized trucks, and everything was designed to revise that. One of the changes you'll see to the existing parking lot is it used to have the entrance up on the upper right-hand corner into there, which was a very awkward slope and connection and sight lines, so we have actually brought it down to the back of the building to make it a much better intersection and make the movements work better. These are some renderings just to give you a feeling of the building. The one thing that I want to note, if you look to the left, the white and red brick, that is the existing gym on the Reed Building where the clock is on the corner. Right there. Thank you, Aji. And to the right of that is the two-story addition. That will essentially house the administrative offices on the lower level and the cafeteria and commons on the upper level. I'll go through the floor plan and give you a brief review of that. And on the right-hand side is the four-story addition. And that two-story and four-story addition is very close to covering the space that was covered by the one-story horseshoe-shaped building that is being removed to build this. So you can see easy access. To the right would be the parent drop-off. Right below the light there would be where the bus drop-off is. So the very easy access to the building, utilizing either the front entrance or going around to the back and into the playground entrance. Next, Aji. And this would be from the parking area or from looking down towards the building. And you can see we've been trying to work with the massing and keep the language of the building similar. We have the big glass on the library. We've incorporated that in the front of the cafeteria, and we've incorporated that in the top of the four-story, trying to make the building work together as one. And if you recall, the existing Reed Building, to get to the front entrance of the children's school, you're facing a 6 to 8 foot wall, and you have to go up steps, and you're actually to the side of the entrance. So there was really no welcoming entrance. So the thing we tried to create here was essentially the courtyard for the library and the courtyard for the school, so that they're distinct entries, but they both have an entry sequence or a courtyard to get into the building. This is the north side, or the back side of, if you want to call it, of the classroom wing. And you'll see the colorful pavement that's planned by the design team. But that serves a dual purpose. It's not only the basketball courts and hard surface play area, it's also the fire department's access to the four-story building. So they have a demountable curb, they can hop up, and they have plenty of space to work should there ever be a need, hopefully never, and be able to access and turn around on the paving area, without creating a separate drive lane and more surface that would be covered with pavement. Next. So this is looking at it from the old library site. The sledding hill will remain on the right, but take a look at the building. And if you notice, years ago you tried to make every facade look the same. Our facades are basically dealing with the solar orientations, and we try to only do the things that are necessary to improve the use of the building. So we have a different look of the building, and that is intentional. From the playground itself, we've kind of created a bowl in the back. It can also be used for an outdoor assembly with the bowl shape that the majority of the students could be out there for an assembly of some sort. We're trying to use the topography. If you notice the sliding board, somebody can't fall off the top of a huge sliding board. It could actually be right into the grade, nestled into the grade. We'll have to see how that design develops, but we also have outdoor seating area, et cetera, that can be used by the school as well as the community in the off hours. And then this is the rear entry where the receiving, and currently, if you notice, the dumpster would be in the parking lot to your right and is exposed and out into the community. It's going to be tucked back into the receiving area with this revised project, and the delivery area is to the left of that concrete area that's shown in the rendering. Construction. I wanted to talk briefly about that. Essentially, we plan on construction start if we go through the approval process. I think construction is spelled wrong, pardon the typo. In September of 2019, And then the construction, oh good, we got the right spelling right for the September of 2021. And we just had a meeting with ISD on another project, so don't tell them that we're finishing in September of 2021. We'll have their approvals done before that. Anyway, the entire site will be unavailable from the start to the end of construction. There are a couple of exceptions to that that we'll work with, and I'll talk about those in a moment. And prior to the start, we will have a PLC, BLPC, PFRC meeting with everyone to share the final design and what was done as far as cost savings and/or value engineering and/or the final design. But essentially, what we want to really do on this site is keep the construction activities to the site and not into the community, not on the street, et cetera. So that's why we're utilizing the entire site. They have the laydown area. They're going to have the parking there, so we don't have parking during construction in the community. They will be on the site. And the library will remain open and fully accessible, and the market will remain open, and we're currently in conversation with the market people so that we can make sure that we do that. There may be some modifications, but we're going to work through that. Next, Aji. So this is a site plan of what we're looking at, and the rear parking lot, the new rear parking lot, we're going to look at phasing that because of the community access. Since you won't be able to cut through the site from 19th Street, you're going to have to come down and around if you come that direction, or you're going to have to come down Lexington while this construction is taking place. But we want to try to work that as a phased process so we can make the access as easy as possible. We will have temporary sidewalks when it is not accessible, and egress to the library will be maintained at all times. And if you notice the hatch mark on McKinley, that is essentially stating that we will be keeping market open every Sunday. Again, there will be some construction activities along there where their right-of-way is or where their use permit allows, so we might have to make some modifications. They may end up having to do market in the street at their summer market essentially layout during the winter for 1 year while this goes on. And sidewalk access will remain along 18th Street. So I just, essentially we're trying to keep everything tight within the site and also keep it safe so we don't have issues of construction injuries. Building design, this is the floor plan of where we are. If you see the yellow rectangle in the middle, that's currently the gym, and the dark wall on the right-hand side going straight up through the building, that is essentially everything to the left of that is remaining and renovated, except for the gray area, which is the library space, which is not being renovated. It will remain. To the right of the yellow space is the administrative suite or area to the building. The gray in the back are service areas. To the left on the top is the pre-K, blue areas, which are classrooms. Blue is generally classroom. And on the right are our kindergarten spaces on the first floor. And I think you probably all know the darker yellow is a gym based on the lines that are on there. Next floor. On the upper level is where we have the cafeteria. One of the things we're trying to do is use the topography. You're essentially coming in the back of the building at the upper level, and that will be what the cafeteria receiving area is. And you have to the left is the current second floor of the Reed building. That is going to be renovated into music and art spaces. And you've got the open area of the library in the middle. And to the right is first grade. And then next floor up, the levels 3 and 4 are essentially the same. And we're working on a flexible plan that meets the current requirements for our educational spaces from teaching and learning. So it's all based on the educational specifications of the spaces that are provided in the building. Next. Path to the permit, permit approval. Today's November 1st, so we're here in front of the Transportation Commission. November 5th, we do have a date now for the Planning Commission, and then the County board is the 17th or 27th, depending on where it gets scheduled. And we are continuing to collaborate and work with county staff as we work through this to meet the use permit and meet the requirements that we need to meet. Next. We do have contacts, they're available, and again, this will be posted on our website, so you'll have access to it if you don't have access any other way. So, open for questions.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Clement, you want to kick us off?
Well, actually, this is not a question, it's a point of information to the other board members or commission members. And one of the modifications to this site is the demolition of a $20 million historic renovation constructed less than 10 years ago. Now, I believe that this decision to do this exemplifies the notion of waste, fraud, and abuse. So I just want to put that on the record. Now, regarding the transportation impacts of this project, I've reviewed the MMTA, that is the transportation analysis. It's called the Multimodal Transportation Analysis, dated October 24th, 2018. And I am skeptical of its principal finding that traffic generated by the elementary school would have a negligible impact to the surrounding area. I live in Westover, just about 2 blocks away from this site. And the PM afternoon rush hour congestion is already severe without development. With development, the number of staff accessing the site will increase 6-fold because the student population is going to increase 6-fold. The MMTL itself predicts increases in AM trips of 379 per day and in the PM 310 per day. That's quite a lot of increase. Yet, because it has subjectively determined, because it certainly can't objectively determine, no significant impact, it proposes no mitigation for the one site that the one intersection that it does believe to be congested, and that's at 18th and Washington Boulevard. And I think this is worse than irresponsible. I think it's reckless. I certainly don't doubt for a minute that that it will go through as is, and it will have phenomenal impacts on the Westover neighborhood. Adverse impacts.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
I do want to note that I was on the PFRC, BLPC through the entire process on this. We did very carefully look at the existing building and the option of building on top, which is there, of course. Commissioner Clement is right that it was built 10 years ago with the intent to add a second story eventually. However, the charge that we had to add the number of student spaces that was necessary, only one more floor could be added on the building without essentially rebuilding the first floor. We needed more height, and that was done in order to preserve open space. There were numerous options that were given to us, which included, of course, building up, but it also would have meant building out into the open space surrounding the school. The neighborhood was very much in favor of keeping as much open space as possible, as was the entire PFRC, BLPC, which is why we came out the way we did with the consensus that, yes, the existing building, as much as we would have loved to have preserved it and used it as intended, it simply wasn't going to fit the site or fit the needs of what the school has to have there as far as capacity goes, and preserve as much open space as possible. We felt that the proposed school, which was adopted by the school board, recommended by the school board, does give us as much open space as we can with fitting in as many students as we can. And it was a win-win that way at the expense of tearing down a 10-year-old building.
And a historic preservation.
Well, a 10-year-old building isn't historic at this point.
The original building is still there, and it's still intact. So it did qualify as a historic.
But that's the library, and the library is being preserved.
Other commissioner questions or comments? Commissioner Capers.
Yes, good evening. Just had a quick question about the surface parking lot on 18th McKinley. Understand that with the consolidation of the site access driveways to one driveway, and with the introduction of additional parking and the drop-off pickup site, with the competing activities at that parking area, were there any additional analysis to look at the possible queuing based on rate of arrival, and time to ensure that the queuing, the stacking will be contained within the parking area?
Yeah, good evening. My name is Rob Schusel. I'm with transportation planning firm of Grove Slade Associates. The simple answer is yes. There was a fair amount of work done regarding the amount of queuing at the drop-off and pickup area within the lot to ensure that there would be enough room. A lot of that was based on doing observations of queuing at other APS elementary schools and measuring the lengths and looking at how they operated and planned and coming up with ideas for how we wanted to plan this one so it could improve upon what we're seeing, what's working and not working at other APS schools. In addition, our traffic study did also look at the traffic implications of consolidating to make sure there wasn't going to be just a numbers issue with vehicle capacity in and out of one driveway instead of having it dispersed to two.
Commissioner Hester?
Could county staff provide a little bit more color on why the North Lexington Street still would have 19 unrestricted parking spaces still?
So the approach there was that likely it would support all-day uses by the few teachers that may need to park there. And so it wasn't the area that we were looking for high turnover, per se, and that's why it's unrestricted. We still do have the tools in our toolbox to make it time restricted or time limited in the future if we need to address issues as it comes forth, but we think this represents a good mix between the community feel and community uses and commercial and high turnover uses on the site and around the site.
As long as we're on this map here, this map doesn't show any on-street parking behind the, what are we calling that, the 18th Street lot, the Northwest lot, but I believe there is currently on-street parking on 18th Street there. Is it not shown for a particular reason?
So largely when we looked at the parking reduction analysis, we really focused on the frontage, the direct frontages of the school, and so that's where this is focusing. And we looked at ensuring that the frontages of the school, along with the on-site spaces, supported the projected demand for the project without assuming that there would be further off-site parking impacts.
Right, but isn't the frontage of the parking lot that belongs to the school, wouldn't that be considered frontage of the school?
Oh, I may be confused because there's two 18th Streets on the site.
Yes.
You are referring to
the northwest corner behind the expanded parking lot. There's an 18th Street over there that...
Yes, yeah. So it's just not that area. We really wanted to maintain that as an area that we weren't focusing on directing people to park. It is someplace that would not qualify for residential zone parking on those frontages, but what we felt was that the spaces shown here did support the use of the site.
Commissioner Boucher.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I'm not that familiar with this area, but I do believe there's another school like a block or two away. Is that correct? Is it Swanson?
Correct.
So are the hours of the two schools from convening to ending, are they around the same? Because I have been in this area when Swanson is opening, and it is just a beehive of activity, of pedestrians, of bikes, of cars, of transit buses, of dash buses. And I think it's literally only a block. Is that correct from this?
That is correct. It's on the other side of the Westover Market, essentially, and up the hill. Yes, they are both in the same area, but they do have separate starting times and ending times. Okay. The other thing is we are currently in the process of finishing the middle school at the Stratford building, where HB currently is. So we will actually be reducing capacity in the Swanson building because we'll be moving some students out of there with the redistricting for the...
To HB Woodlawn? Or, I'm sorry.
But where HB Woodlawn is now is becoming a new middle school.
Okay.
So we'll be actually we have a lot of relocatables currently at Swanson. We're hoping that the majority of those will disappear, but we have to see where the counts go, but we're essentially looking at reducing the capacity of Swanson, which is full right now, which adds to the beehive of activity. So we are looking at all of that as we go forward. But they are at different times, and I think Rob could talk a little bit about the analysis they did.
Yeah, that would be interesting to hear.
Swanson's bell times are currently 7:50 a.m. And 2:24 p.m. Our base assumption is that the new elementary school at Reed would have the standard elementary school time, which its bell times are 9 a.m. and 3:41 p.m. So it's more than an hour offset. We generally discussed at the level that we would, although as I understand, bell times are not set in stone, but there's a general agreement that they should be offset because of the proximity.
Did staff have something to add on this question as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to point of clarification. They're about two very, very large blocks away. So I would say they're closer to a quarter mile apart than they are, you know, an eighth of a mile. It's not quite as close as they may look and sometimes feel.
Thank you. Commissioner Calkins.
I have a few questions about both vehicular treatment and pedestrian treatments at the intersection of Washington Boulevard and McKinley. The pedestrian crossings there right now are pretty subpar. Is there any plan to enhance those with the redevelopment of the school?
So I think that we have some plans in the works to do improvements to the crossings, particularly the markings. Historically, they had been a stamped brick pattern, which didn't wear well over time, and we've worked to put in high visibility crossings. If there are specific issues, there are no design changes associated with this effort to make design improvements. However, if you do have recommendations, we can.
So my second comment was going to ping off the fact that I used to drive through here on a fairly regular basis on my way home from work. And I know that there is not a left turn bay from Washington Boulevard heading into Westover to 18th Street North, and it creates a significant amount of dangerous behavior. There's 2 parking spots that were maintained when the bike lanes were put in that people swing into to go around a person turning left. I think the county might want to consider in the long run removing those 2 parking spots, bringing the bike lane next to the curve, and if possible fitting in a left turn bay pocket, because I've seen some people do some really aggressive and dangerous maneuvers, and if we're adding that many more students and parents are dropping off, I get concerned about either bikers and pedestrians crossing when people are doing aggressive maneuvers, because there's enough space to get into the bike lane and go around and people do it, and it's not ideal.
So I'm going to make sure I understand which direction you're
So
coming.
if you're heading towards Ballston.
Okay, so if you're going east,
yes,
that approach to 18th, so the left turn there, we can certainly look into that.
There's 2 parking spots that were maintained on street that could easily be removed, and you could bring the bike lane against the curb and have a through lane and a left turn lane still, and probably reduce a lot of safety conflicts. Not always a big fan of left turns, but I've seen enough people make horrible decisions that maybe it would create a safer situation.
Other
We can certainly do
commissioner
that.
Questions or comments? All right, then I have a string of questions about parking. Sorry, but like let everybody else get their other stuff out of the way because I'm going to ask a bunch of parking questions. So can the transportation consultant talk about the parking demand analysis and what went into the 164 space parking demand calculation?
Okay. Several data sources went into that calculation. One of it was, I'd say there's probably two major ones. One was our counts of parking. We counted all the lots on site. We observed what on-street parking for all around there. And because we had sweeps every half hour, we were able to look at opening times of establishments in the library and activities to kind of be able to guess patterns of who was parking where by terms of what fills up and what disperses when. Additionally, we have the APS Go survey data, which allows us to know the parking and travel habits of APS staff. They also did surveys of visitors, which helped us fill in general times, how much a elementary school would have visitors and how many of those would drive and park, how long they generally stay, when they usually arrive. So we were able to get a visitor demand. So those surveys and our field counts of parking were the two major sources. We also met with library staff and they discussed their counts of people and activities that they keep at the library themselves. So we had a general idea of how many staff they had, how many are on site at a certain time. So we could compare that to the counts we had in the field and see what was matching and what wasn't. And those might be, we also looked at comparables, national standards, but that ended up not looking as, that data wasn't as solid as just the direct data we had from the field and also that already was gathered by APS for other APS facilities.
So would you say that 164 number already accounts for the expected effects of APS's TDM?
We actually took a slight reduction over the latest APS Go surveys. So it's a few spaces smaller for staff. I believe we assumed another improvement of 5% in the reduction of the drive alone rate. It's somewhere in that range. Because we were able now to have multiple APS Go surveys to see how the trend line is going. We did not assume that the success in the last few years would continue. But we assumed there would still be some more reduction.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Just one point of clarification. The 163 is the demand for both the library and the school. One of the things that we've heard from the community and patrons to the library is that the parking capacity for the library was a bit strained. So in all of this, the zoning ordinance would have required about 33 spaces, not 133 spaces, 33 spaces, and your parking demand was closer to 46, 50.
Yeah, 45.
45. So that is adding some parking demand above just the APS.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful, both of you. So yeah, I think 164 is a great number. Padding that a tiny bit is not the worst idea in the world. 170 is what you're coming in at, planning to build, is that correct?
Nope.
70.
I think it's 178 is what we look at on all the frontages and the
189.
Sorry, 189.
189.
For all the frontages and then all of the spaces on site.
Do you have a slide on that?
Yeah.
Where's your stick? Yeah, you didn't. It's those. No, yours is on there.
So that's the 189 there. And that includes the parking in the bus lane and in the arrival departure lane for the pickup and drop off.
Gotcha. Is the one, sorry, now I'm doubting myself and wondering where this 170 number came from. What's the zoning ordinance? What would have been the zoning ordinance requirement without the modification?
150.
Thank you. All right, great. That's very helpful. I think this is a great project, and I applaud PFRC and BLPC for all of the back and forth that's gone through about the number of parking spaces and the design and all of that. There's just one thing I'm having trouble getting past, which is this project is already over budget and under strong direction to reduce how much it's spending. And this finding in the MMTA that 80% of the 150 on-street parking spaces within a quarter-mile walk of the school site are unoccupied during basically demand for the school. And the fact that we're building new parking on site, we're taking up green space on site, we're taking up open space on site, we're building additional parking lot that doesn't already exist on site, when there is, by that count, 120 parking spaces just sitting around unused within a quarter-mile walk. And I have real trouble finding how that is an appropriate use of money, taxpayer money, in a tough budget time to build additional parking lot when there is all of that space sitting around. And we have a master transportation plan that says we value shared parking. Like, if this isn't the definition of shared parking, I don't know what is. Like, those on-street parking spaces get used in the evenings at dinner parties, and they get used, when people get home from work and that sort of thing, and they are sitting open during the day for the most part, other than the occasional, cleaning person visiting or whatever. That's the 20% that's apparently in use during the day. And the fact that instead of using that shared parking resource, we are proposing to build additional parking lot. We are proposing to pave over existing open space. We're proposing to spend that money. Does not sit well with me. Do other commissioners have any additional questions or comments?
Can you bring up the chart that shows what that utilization is?
Commissioner Calkins, go ahead.
I have a question. Is this utilization including the lots, or is it strictly based on the on-street parking?
It's on-street parking that is adjacent to residential buildings.
Excludes any
It's
of
those
the parking
blue.
lots?
It's those blue lines on the map.
Okay.
Those streets.
The parking lots are shaded in, so I wanted to clarify that for myself.
Go ahead.
And just for clarification, if you did want to look into it, the MMTA does have the utilization rates block by block. This is an aggregate number that's shown here.
Thank you. Anybody else? Would someone like to make a motion?
One more comment. I don't think we discussed the pedestrian connection from the library to Washington Boulevard that staff had identified as a missing part of the existing plan, which I do think would be important to maintain just so that people have easy access from Washington Boulevard to the library.
All right, I move that the Transportation Commission recommend that the county board approve the subject use permit amendment for the renovation and addition project to create a new neighborhood elementary school at the Reed site.
I'll second.
Hold off on your second. And additionally find that additionally propose that the proposed vacations are consistent with the master transportation plan. There, I think that was sufficient. Is there a second now that the motion is done? All right, thank you. Any discussion? Commissioner Collins.
I'd like to have a friendly amendment that we recommend that the board look into adding the pedestrian connection to Washington Boulevard as part of their approval process.
Say that one more time.
What am I looking for? So there's a missing pedestrian connection that currently exists that is not being maintained in the proposed site plan. So my motion, and I have never done this before, so forgive me, would essentially say that we, the Transportation Commission, would like to have that pedestrian connection included in the final approval of the plan.
Before you go down that road, can we get staff clarification? My understanding was that that path was continuing to exist. Staff were just trying to get it to be ADA accessible. Is that correct?
No, actually, the current plans show that path being removed or being through the actual parking lane. And so we recommend pulling it off as a separate ADA accessible path.
All right. You want to wordsmith yourself?
Yes. So I amend the motion to include that a ADA accessible path connecting from the library to Washington Boulevard be included in the final design plan.
Is there a second for this amendment? Commissioner Yeri seconds. Is there further commission discussion on the amendment? All those in favor of amending the motion to add the provision from the Transportation Commission about maintaining an ADA accessible path through the site? All those in favor? That's unanimous. So the motion has now been amended, and it's basically the county manager's recommendation plus that little bit about the accessible path that we just voted on. Is there any further discussion on this motion as amended? All right, all those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? All right, thank you very much.
Our next item is item number 6, the shared mobility devices. This is an update. Jim Larson is with us this evening to present.
Thanks. Let me give you a brief rundown. First of all, I want to thank the chair and the commissioners for supporting the launch of the demonstration project and helping achieve some adjustments at the last minute, particularly Chair Slatt, to move us forward in this pilot. As I may have mentioned before, this is a very fluid project, and the dynamics change weekly, if not daily, of how it's moving. We're sharing information with our colleagues regionally and also monitoring activity nationally. In fact, I presented our pilot launch at the Bike and Ped Group at Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments yesterday, along with Maryland, Prince George's County, the District of Columbia, and Baltimore. They were reporting their results. We were talking about how our pilot was getting launched. It was a very fruitful presentation. I had the police department, public schools, our team, staff team, consultants there to kind of help us. It was a very good time for us as we're going through the process. The district will launch its new application on November 15th, which staff will be analyzing for insights and possible assistance, as they're also changing certain things, which they would not reveal yesterday, but I believe they're going to take a stronger approach on their 10-mile-an-hour limit as well. We're trying to keep track of that since we started with the 10-mile-an-hour, and frankly, not taking the side of the operators, but if everybody could agree on whatever it's supposed to be, this can only be good for, I mean, my personal opinion, for all concerned. So we'll watch that, we'll monitor it, and keep you apprised of how it's going. We now have 2 companies so far, Lime and Bird, applied for, and I believe Lime's just sent in and we've applied to put their e-scooters, but those are not launched yet. I'm sure you've seen the other 2 around the county. They're having some difficulties with the speed thing. They knew it when they applied, but the technology, and I don't want to go into the detail because I'm still learning it, but they'll be all done and complied with by, I'm going to give them an extension November 30th, which I've told the board in its notes, which should be going out tomorrow. They were communicating with us all along, so I'm not saying they were trying to pull, you know, the wool over our eyes or anything like that. I think the way this geofencing works for the whole county, it's a little more complicated than just zeroing in on one area. So we're watching that closely, but I just wanted you to know where we are on that. All new companies will not hit the ground unless, you know, they're in full compliance. Our mobility at Arlington VAUS email is receiving an average of 10 emails a day. Some days 30, some days 2 or 3. I don't have the report yet, but we're monitoring that very closely because, as you know, when we get closer to making a board recommendation as we move forward through the pilot, the board is certainly, and you will too, want to know, well, so what's going on? What are we being asked to approve, and what's the community saying? I can give you a couple of updates. To date, since October 1st, that we've been tracking, 9 reported crashes. Nothing major, except we had a student 2 days ago who was on a scooter in a crosswalk, and he was hit, not anything major, but Dan Murphy of the police department and I are working very closely. He's going to talk to the parents to find out how the student got the scooter, and that's another whole discussion. I'll be glad to carry that on at another time or answer questions. The top public complaints are illegal sidewalk riding and trail riding, improper parking, unsafe riding, underage riders, and speed. But that's just, as you, I want to remind you, it's only 30 days. You know, we're trying to keep an eye on. And all of these get responded to. A couple of them are a little bit more serious questions. They get into questions like, what does insurance cover? Things that we haven't even gotten to yet, but we're working on that process, and I'm working with county attorney, Commonwealth attorney, police department, and others to, this is a, like I said, a work in progress. Actually, it's kind of exciting, but it does have its days of challenge at the same time. We're working very closely, not only with the operators in the police department on safety, and as you may know, the Street Smart campaign that the police department works with launches next week till December, and we have some messaging going out. We've already done a little updating on the current county website, but I decided to, you know, we really didn't have all the bandwidth and resources, so I pulled our Arlington Transportation Partner team in with a whole working group, and we're developing a more definitive marketing plan that talks to the public, not in technical terms, but in ways to start helping change behavior, which is not an easy subject. Public school system, of course, everybody's very concerned about underage students riding scooters. And we're going to be addressing that as well. We're working with Kirsten Holloman specifically on that subject. I guess that's the end of my summary. I'd answer any questions you might have at this time.
Commissioner Clement.
Yeah, this was a couple days ago, possibly last Friday. I saw a kid no more than 14 years of age with no helmet accessing the Custis Trail. Now that's 3 violations of one ordinance, okay, within the space of a few seconds. And there is absolutely no mechanism of enforcement, none. Because there's no way that you could even ask Arlington Police to monitor the length of the Custis Trail or any of the other trails in this county. So what I'm trying to point out to my fellow commissioners is that absent an enforcement policy, a realistic enforcement policy, this pilot program is both reckless and irresponsible. Thank you.
Anybody else? Commissioner Colgins.
Have you heard interest from other providers about entering the market?
Oh, sorry, I should have brought that up. Yes, I've talked to, you may have read that Lyft is entering the market. We just reviewed everything with them. I'm expecting them to come on board. I'm expecting Skip, I think, and there's one other company, and I think also that Jump may be coming on in January. So that's good because, frankly, there aren't enough funds to keeping our consultants working on this. So we're working on that now.
Speed limit won't apply to Jump, though, right? The 10-mile-per-hour speed limit?
Yeah, the e-bike is 15, okay. Right? Correct.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
In keeping track of incidents, complaints,
yes, and we're also working with I've forgotten the name of it, but the emergency at the police department where things come in, we're working together with them so that we don't miss, like we have one bit of information, they have another, we will consolidate that information.
But I'd also like to know, are you also tracking other alternative transportation methods such as capital bike share or the e-bikes, or for that matter, hoverboards and other electric mobility devices that aren't automobiles? Because with bicycles, presumably, we have accidents, we have things that happen. Right. I'd like to know, I think it would be useful to know, is the accident rate any different between the scooters and these other methods?
Well, the answer is no, I'm not tracking it, but the police department is tracking some of what you're talking about. And it wouldn't be fair to quote from my memory, but I just got, not for Arlington, but I just got a note from, I think, Austin, Texas, that was studying accidents per whatever for scooters versus accidents per whatever for bicycles. And of course, it's a much lower number for scooters than it is bicycles, but that's just anecdotal information we have discussed the very subject you're talking about, though.
Because I think
I'll go back and we'll get into that. I think it's a good.
I think when you do your final reports, it will be useful to have that as a comparison to show whether this is in fact a problem or whether, despite the incidents, it might actually be safer than bicycles or, again, other methods. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Culkins again.
Have we had any issues with scooters bleeding in from DC or vice versa, and our caps not being balanced? Or have the providers thus far done a very good job of rebalancing scooters to make sure that we have an adequate number in Arlington?
I think we have an adequate number, and we don't know how many are slipping in, although I believe some are. Once we start getting our data reports, we're hoping some of that information is going to show up as well. But it is happening to some extent.
And I think it should. I just want to make sure that they're not all ending up in DC and staying in DC.
No, I think, based on observation, I think they're doing a pretty good job of keeping them here right now. And in fact, I could tell you that I talked to Line Bike yesterday, general manager, and I haven't confirmed this, but they've hired 21 full-time people, and they have a warehouse space here that theoretically they're working and monitoring not just those contractors that, juice it, I think that's what they call them, and they're actually going around trying to self-police. We're really trying to push the operators to help safety, and be out there. But I think so far it looks good. There are a few crazy things happening. I was on 23rd Street last night. I saw a Line Bike kind of next to this trash can, and somebody had broken it up and thrown it down. The average length of a Line Bike today, I guess they're going to make it better, is 23 days. It's pretty interesting statistic.
Anything else? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item 7 is other commission business. Two things very quickly. Our next meeting is November 29th, and this is our December meeting, which we will have in late November. And also something that we can start to think about is our packets. Currently, you get the packet via email. It's also on the Transportation Commission website under the meeting. The materials are arranged by item, and we have paper copy at the meetings here. Eventually, we'll probably get away from the paper copy. The question is, when are we ready to do so? So, and we don't have to answer that now. It's just kind of food for thought.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would put out there is the digital packet. Completely digital works for me because I have a device I can bring with me to consult the packet during the meeting, but I don't think that should be a requirement of being on Transportation Commission. So until the county is prepared to provide some sort of means of reading a digital packet during the meeting, I don't think we can fully get away from the paper in person. A couple things I would add here on other commission business. Thank you to Commissioner Price and Commissioner Yeri for agreeing to be the Lee Highway rep and alternate for the Lee Highway planning process. Thank you to Commissioner Calkins for agreeing to do public facilities review for the Education Center site. I'm handling Best Western personally for site plan review, but the American Legion site for site plan review on Washington Boulevard across from the Giant. So if that is an area of the county that interests you, please talk to me after the meeting because we need somebody for that. Anything else for the good of the order? All right, see you all in 28 days.
Have a good evening.